The town of Maplewood was a small, close-knit place where everyone knew one another. Narrow streets wound through rows of charming old houses. The local cafe bustled with familiar patrons, and the Central Park was always filled with the laughter of children. But beneath its peaceful exterior lay a quiet yet persistent division, racial prejudice that many were reluctant to acknowledge. Layla Carter, a 14-year-old girl, was the heart of the Carter family. Her father, Marcus Carter, was the town's first black police chief, a resilient and principled man who deeply believed in justice. Under his guidance, Layla grew up holding onto the belief that no matter how unjust the world might seem, truth and justice would ultimately prevail. Layla loved painting and often spent hours sketching in the park. She enjoyed capturing peaceful moments, the smiles of passers-by or sunlight streaming through the trees. But at times, her art reflected sorrow and injustice, emotions she felt but struggled to express in words. One evening, as the sun began to set, Layla stood near a convenience store, waiting for her mother to finish shopping. She gazed at the painting in her hands, unaware that a few prejudiced eyes were watching her intently. David Miller, a police officer with over 15 years of service, stepped out of his patrol car. He noticed Layla standing near the convenience store and immediately felt suspicious. In Miller's mind, the prejudices he had carried since childhood began to shout, "What's this girl doing here?" Probably waiting for an opportunity to cause trouble. Just minutes earlier, a theft had been reported at that very convenience store, despite having no evidence or a specific description of the suspect. Miller decided to act. He approached Layla and demanded to know why she was there. Layla, confused, had no idea why she was being questioned. "I'm just standing here, drawing," Layla replied, her voice trembling but trying to stay calm. "Drawing? Don't lie. Do you know about the theft that just happened here?" Miller pressed, his tone accusatory and intimidating. Fear began to grip Layla. She tried to explain, but Miller wasn't listening. In his frustration, he decided to escalate the situation. He grabbed Layla's arm roughly and pulled her, causing her to fall to the ground. Her pained cry echoed through the street, drawing the attention of bystanders. One passerby, seeing the injustice, quickly took out their phone and began recording the entire incident. But Miller didn't stop. He believed he was doing the right thing, convinced that Layla was a suspect who needed to be dealt with immediately. Layla was taken to the hospital, her body bearing multiple injuries. She couldn't stop trembling, not just from the pain but also from fear and a profound sense of humiliation. When Marcus received the news, it felt as though his world had collapsed. He rushed to the hospital, where he found his daughter lying in a bed, tears streaming down her face. "Dad?" Layla called out, her voice hoarse. "I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus embraced his daughter, his heart heavy with anger and despair. As a police officer, he had always believed in the justice system. But now, the very system he had sworn to uphold had turned against his own family. Meanwhile, the video of the incident began circulating on social media. The town's residents quickly split into two camps. Some condemned Miller's actions, while others defended him, claiming he was simply doing his duty. At home, Marcus faced a difficult decision. He knew that to protect his daughter and uphold justice, he would have to bring this incident to light, even if it meant losing the support of his colleagues and the community. Officer Miller was temporarily suspended pending an investigation, but he showed no remorse. In his mind, he was the victim of a smear campaign by people who didn't understand the challenges of police work. He even received support from certain individuals in town who shared his prejudices. Meanwhile, the Carter family faced threats and criticism. Many people called their home, spewing hateful remarks, but Marcus refused to back down. He held a press conference where he declared, "My daughter was attacked because of prejudice, and this is unacceptable. I am committed to bringing this incident to light and standing up for justice." Marcus's statement earned admiration from some, but it also sparked intense controversy. Amid the turmoil, Layla sank deeper into fear and helplessness. She couldn't bring herself to step outside or look anyone in the eye. Yet, in her pain, Layla found a spark of strength. She began to paint, not the peaceful scenes she once loved, but images that captured the pain and injustice she had endured. These paintings became her voice, a way to confront her fear and reclaim her power. And so, the storm had only just begun. The Carter family was unknowingly stepping into a battle not just for Layla but for everyone who had ever suffered injustice like her. News of Layla's case spread far beyond the small town of Maplewood, reaching major cities across the country. Local newspapers published articles, and national television networks aired Layla's story. The video capturing Miller's use of force against her became the center of heated debates. While some condemned Miller's actions as abuse of power and racism, others defended him, claiming he was just doing his job. The Carter family became the focus of intense public attention. Reporters camped outside their home daily, while Marcus received a constant stream of threatening phone calls and emails. Despite the mounting pressure, he remained steadfast. He decided to hold a press conference to share his perspective. At the press conference, Marcus stood before a sea of cameras and spoke with calm yet unwavering resolve. "My daughter, Layla Carter, was treated unfairly because of the color of her skin. This act not only hurt Layla but also shattered our trust in the justice system. I will not stop fighting for justice, not just for my daughter, but for everyone in our community." Marcus's speech resonated deeply. On social media, the hashtag Justice for Layla began trending. Human rights organizations and social activists took notice of the case, and a movement against injustice and racism started to take shape. The Black community in Maplewood began organizing peaceful protests. Participants carried signs and chanted slogans like, "Justice for Layla," and "End racism now." These demonstrations attracted not only Black residents but also white allies who shared the same ideals. A group of local human rights lawyers reached out to the Carter family, offering to assist them in the upcoming legal battle. Layla, still struggling with pain and fear, was inspired by those standing up for her. She began painting again, this time capturing the spirit of the protesters. One painting in particular stood out, a piece titled "The Flame of Hope," depicting a blazing torch held high against a dark night by hands of diverse skin tones. The painting quickly went viral online, becoming a symbol of the movement. However, not everything went smoothly. Some members of the community, especially those who supported Miller, began organizing counter-protests. They claimed Miller was being smeared and that Layla's case was simply a misunderstanding. Racist rhetoric flooded social media, subjecting the Carter family to a new wave of attacks. Marcus, though resilient, began to feel the weight of the pressure mounting. He realized that achieving justice would require not only courage but also strategy and the support of strong allies. The Carter family decided to file a lawsuit against Miller, accusing him of abuse of power and racial discrimination. They were represented by a team of top lawyers, led by the formidable Angela Brooks. Angela, a Black attorney with a record of winning numerous human rights cases, was determined to do everything in her power to defend Layla. The legal preparations were far from easy. Angela and her team had to gather compelling evidence to prove that Miller's actions were not merely a mistake, but rooted in racial prejudice. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed the video footage, and dug into Miller's past records. It was revealed that Miller had a history of using excessive force, particularly against Black individuals, though those incidents had been swept under the rug. Meanwhile, Miller didn't stand idle. He hired a team of skilled lawyers to defend him. They attempted to construct a narrative portraying Layla as a suspicious individual, and argued that Miller's actions were entirely reasonable under the circumstances. Layla faced immense psychological pressure. She was repeatedly required to recount the details of the incident to lawyers and legal experts. Each time she revisited the painful memory, felt like her soul was being torn apart. Yet, Layla refused to give up. She decided that she would not remain silent, because silence meant surrender. On the first day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, social activists, and ordinary citizens filled the seats, eager to witness the proceedings. The Carter family sat in the front row, while Miller sat on the opposite side, his face cold and his gaze defiant. Miller's lawyers began by attempting to discredit Layla. They asked invasive questions designed to unsettle her and make her lose her composure. But Layla, despite being only 14 years old, displayed remarkable courage. She answered each question clearly and confidently, refusing to let anyone shake her resolve. Angela Brooks, representing Layla, quickly counterattacked. She played the video recorded by the witness, breaking it down moment by moment to demonstrate that Miller's actions were unnecessary and motivated by prejudice. She also called witnesses to the stand, including the person who filmed the video and others who had seen the entire incident. Miller, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, began to feel the pressure. Angela's sharp questioning forced him to confront the truth. Deep down, he knew his actions could not be justified. Outside the courtroom, protests continued. On one side were those chanting for justice for Layla, while on the other were Miller's supporters holding signs in his defense. Tension hung thick in the air over Maplewood. Yet, the Carter family held steadfast to their faith. To them, this was more than just a trial, it was a fight for justice, for change, and for a better future. The trial entered a pivotal phase as the prosecution began delving into David Miller's work history. Angela Brooks, leveraging her sharp intellect and extensive experience, presented a series of documents from the internal records of the Maplewood Police Department. These documents revealed that Miller had faced multiple complaints for abuse of power over the years, none of which had been met with serious consequences. Angela addressed the court. These records demonstrate that David Miller's unprofessional and biased behavior is not an isolated incident. It's a recurring pattern, a systemic issue that, if left unaddressed, will continue to harm the community. Witnesses were called to the stand one by one. Among them was a young black man named Jamal, who had been subjected to unnecessary force by Miller during a traffic stop 3 years prior. Jamal recounted how, despite doing nothing wrong, he had been beaten by Miller and subsequently charged without cause. With emotion in his voice, Jamal said, "I thought I was just an ordinary person whose voice would never be heard. But today, I stand here to speak the truth not just for Layla, but for everyone who's been hurt by people who abuse their power like Miller." Meanwhile, Miller began to feel the weight of the mounting pressure. He realized that his past actions were catching up with him. Yet, instead of admitting fault, he remained obstinate, insisting that he was merely following the law. Outside the courtroom, the movement supporting Layla grew stronger. Protesters from across the region poured into Maplewood, carrying messages demanding reform in the policing system. Layla's artwork, particularly her painting The Flame of Hope, appeared on banners, t-shirts, and media coverage. Layla began to understand that she had become a symbol for a struggle far larger than herself. Miller's legal team attempted to shift the narrative by blaming the stressful work environment he faced daily. They argued that Miller had acted instinctively and without racial bias. They also tried to portray Layla as a defiant teenager who failed to comply with police instructions. Angela quickly countered, "Instinct is no excuse for violence and discrimination. If every officer is allowed to act recklessly based on personal bias, then the very foundation of our justice system collapses." The trial grew more intense when Miller was finally called to the stand to answer questions directly. Angela posed a question that left the courtroom in silence. "Have you ever asked yourself why, out of all the people standing near the store that day, you singled out a young black girl holding a painting?" Miller was silent for a long moment, struggling to formulate an answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Layla continued painting as a way to stay strong. Her mother, Rachel, became her biggest source of encouragement, constantly reminding her that no matter how difficult things became, their family would never give up. The movement for justice for Layla spread far beyond Maplewood. Peaceful protests erupted in major cities, with people marching to deliver a message against racism and police violence. Prominent human rights organizations, along with artists and social activists, publicly voiced their support for Layla and the Carter family. In Maplewood, a special art exhibition was organized to showcase Layla's work. The event attracted not only local residents but also journalists and activists from across the country. During the exhibition, Layla, despite her young age, gave a speech. "These paintings are not just my feelings. They are the voices of everyone who has ever faced injustice. I hope they can inspire change." Layla's words resonated deeply with the audience. Her paintings became symbols of unity, hope, and the determination to fight against injustice. Meanwhile, Marcus began advocating for reforms within the Maplewood Police Department. He organized racial awareness training sessions, called for greater transparency in handling complaints, and pushed for community involvement in police oversight. Despite resistance from some, Marcus remained steadfast. He believed that these changes were the only way to rebuild the community's trust. The final day of the trial had arrived. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the verdict. Inside the courtroom, the tension was so thick that no one dared to breathe too loudly. The jury returned after hours of deliberation and announced that David Miller was found guilty of abuse of power and racially motivated actions. He was stripped of his badge, dismissed from the police force, and sentenced to prison. As the verdict was read, Layla held her mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. They were tears not only of relief but also of hope, hope that justice could truly prevail. Outside the courtroom, hundreds of protesters cheered and celebrated. But Layla knew this was only the first step in a much longer journey. She resolved to continue painting and using her art to spread messages of justice and equality. The Carter family returned home, exhausted but resolute. Marcus turned to his daughter and said, "You've done something many adults wouldn't dare to do. You stood up for justice. And your mother and I are so proud of you." Layla smiled, feeling a newfound strength welling up inside her. She knew her journey was far from over, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The court's verdict brought justice to Layla and the Carter family, but the psychological scars she endured were not so easily healed. Layla began attending counseling sessions, where she was encouraged to share her feelings and confront her fears. In one conversation with her counselor, Layla said, "I feel like every eye is on me, like I'm constantly being judged. I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to paint anymore. I'm scared that if I step outside, it will all happen again." The counselor gently replied, "Layla, you've been through something incredibly painful, and no one has the right to judge you for how you feel. But don't let fear control your life. You stood up so bravely before, and now you need to take the next step forward." These words of encouragement slowly helped Layla regain her confidence. She started spending more time with her family, especially her mother, Rachel. The two often cooked together, making Layla's favorite dishes like waffles and chicken soup. These small, intimate moments helped her feel safe and loved. Layla also resumed painting. This time, her artwork no longer depicted sorrow. Instead, she began creating pieces that represented renewal, hope, and unity. One standout painting, titled "The Bridge of Light," depicted people holding hands as they crossed a dark chasm together. While Layla focused on her healing journey, Marcus began pushing for reforms within the Maplewood Police Department. He understood deeply that preventing similar tragedies required systemic change at its core. Marcus proposed a series of reform measures, including bias awareness training. All officers would be required to attend sessions to understand unconscious biases and learn how to manage them. Transparency in complaint handling. Any complaints of police misconduct would be addressed openly and transparently. Community involvement. Establishing an oversight council composed of representatives from diverse ethnic communities to monitor police activities. Initially, Marcus's proposals faced resistance from some members of the police force, who argued that these reforms were unnecessary and would weaken the authority of the police. But Marcus remained undeterred. He spent hours speaking to each individual, explaining that these changes would not only benefit the community but also help rebuild trust in law enforcement. Outside the police department, community discussions were held, providing a platform for people to share their opinions and suggestions. Layla, though still shy, attended one such discussion and gave a speech. "I believe no one is born with prejudice. It's something we learn, and it's something we can unlearn. I hope these changes will create a better future for everyone." Her words resonated with many, inspiring hope for a more inclusive and just community. David Miller, after being sentenced, began to undergo an internal transformation. During his time in prison, he participated in a rehabilitation education program for inmates. There, he met individuals who had been victims of police violence and racism. Their stories forced him to reflect on his own actions. One evening, during a conversation with the program facilitator, Miller confessed, "I never thought I was biased. I always believed I was just doing my duty. But now, I realize the prejudices I carried have hurt so many people." The facilitator responded, "Recognizing your mistakes is the first step, but taking action to make amends is what truly matters." After earning an early release for good behavior, Miller decided to write a letter of apology to the Carter family. In the letter, he expressed his regret and pledged to dedicate the rest of his life to fighting injustice. Although Marcus and Layla were initially hesitant to accept his apology, they ultimately chose to forgive him. Layla said to her father, "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of anger." A year after the incident, Maplewood had transformed. The police department implemented the reforms Marcus had proposed, and bias awareness training became a regular practice. More importantly, the bond between the police and the community grew stronger than ever. Layla, with her experiences, emerged as a young activist. She frequently traveled to schools and workshops to share her story. One of the key messages she brought was, "Justice is not just about punishment, it's about change. We can't alter the past, but we can build a better future." Layla's paintings continued to gain attention. A major exhibition in New York showcased her entire collection, including the iconic The Bridge of Light. The exhibition was not only a recognition of her talent, but also a symbol of her journey for justice. The Carter family, after weathering the storm, found peace again. Marcus continued his work on reforms, while Rachel opened a small cafe where young artists could display their work. As for Layla, she kept painting not just with brushes, but with her heart and her unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity. Maplewood was no longer just a small town with unseen prejudices. It had become a united community where the light of justice and hope shone brightly. A year after the events in Maplewood, Layla's story and the journey of the Carter family left an indelible mark not only on their community but also inspired thousands of young people across the United States. Layla was invited to attend a national conference on social justice in Washington, D.C., where young activists from across the country came together to share their stories and ideas. At the conference, Layla stepped onto the stage to the applause of hundreds. She wore a simple dress, but her eyes radiated confidence and determination. Layla began her speech by recounting the painful events she had endured, but she quickly shifted to a message of hope. "What happened to me was a wound, but I refuse to let it define who I am. I want to turn that pain into a force to build a society where everyone is treated with fairness, regardless of their skin color or background." Layla went on to share her latest painting, titled The Flame of the Youth, depicting a diverse group of young people holding a torch together, marching forward. The painting quickly became a symbol for the youth movement, featured in educational campaigns and protests nationwide. At the end of the conference, Layla received praise from renowned activists, but what moved her most were the letters from young people who expressed how her story had helped them overcome their fears and stand up for themselves. In Maplewood, Marcus continued his reform work within the police force. He launched a new program called Police and Community, aimed at fostering stronger connections between officers and residents. Under this program, police officers participated in community activities such as teaching, volunteering, and hosting friendly meet-and-greet events with the public. The first gathering took place at the Central Park, the same spot where Layla once sat and painted. Standing before the crowd, Marcus said, "We can't build trust with words alone. We must act, listen, and be willing to change. Maplewood is home to all of us, and I am committed to doing everything I can to make this home safe and fair for everyone." The event ended with a friendly soccer match between the police and the town's youth. For the first time in years, the residents felt that the police force was no longer a threat but a group of allies. Marcus's reforms gradually spread to neighboring towns, becoming a model for rebuilding trust between police and communities. However, Marcus knew that the journey was far from over, and he remained determined to press forward. One day, the Carter family received an unexpected letter from David Miller. In the letter, he offered a heartfelt apology, not only for his actions but also for the pain he had caused an innocent girl and her family. Miller wrote, "I cannot undo what has happened, but I want to dedicate the rest of my life to making amends for those mistakes. I hope that one day, I may be forgiven." Marcus read the letter with a thoughtful expression. He called Layla and Rachel together to discuss it. Rachel was the first to speak. "Forgiveness isn't easy, but the fact that he's acknowledged his mistakes and wants to change is what matters." Layla thought for a long moment before saying, "I think we should forgive him. I don't want to carry anger with me forever. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's for us." The Carter family decided to write a response, expressing that they accepted Miller's apology but emphasized that real change must be demonstrated through actions. Miller later joined educational programs on addressing biases and became an advocate for the social justice movement. 2 years after the tragic events in Maplewood, the town had transformed for the better. The reforms in the police force not only brought fairness but also became a source of pride for the community. Layla, now 16 years old, continued to pursue her passion for painting and had become a national symbol for the fight for justice. At a major art exhibition in New York, Layla stood before hundreds of people, presenting her latest piece titled, "The Light of Faith." The painting depicted a small girl standing amidst a crowd, holding a brightly glowing lantern, guiding people through a dark path. Layla addressed the audience. "We can all be a light in someone else's darkness. My story is not just my own. It belongs to everyone who has ever stood up against injustice. I believe that as long as we don't give up, the light of justice will always illuminate our path." Her speech was met with resounding applause. Though still young, Layla had become an inspiring activist, proving that even a single individual could spark significant change. Back in Maplewood, Marcus continued his work as police chief. He held monthly discussions with the community, staying true to his promise that transparency and fairness would remain the foundation of the police force. The Carter family found peace again after their struggles, though they understood that their journey was far from over. They knew that justice was not a destination but a long road that required patience and determination. The story ends with Layla sitting by her window, paintbrush in hand, working on a new painting. In it, she depicted a small town glowing under the light of countless torches of hope, where people stood hand in hand, moving forward together.